Good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the FCCT Foreign Correspondent Club of Thailand. I'm Alada Pisuwan, will be your host and moderator for today. It's my pleasure to organize the panel discussion on the topic of the U.S. trade war. What will it mean for Thailand and the region? Our panel today will bring you the thought-provoking and beneficial as we explore economic policy for Thailand in response to the recent chaos following President Trump's announcement of the trade tariff last week. It sounds like the economic earthquake of Thailand, and now we are dealing with the aftershock. So far, I believe that all of you have been following the news and are looking forward to seeing what next step is, especially here in Thailand. Luckily today, we have a distinguished panel that brings a wealth of knowledge and insight into how these tariffs have been shaping economic policy and business strategy in Thailand. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists to you. Starting from my right-hand side, here is Kun Nathakon Thewakul Kun Ploom. He is Thai television host and political analyst from Thailand. Next to him, Dr. Virayut Kanchuchat, Deputy Leader of the People's Party and former professor at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies from Tokyo. And luckily, we have him with us today. Dr. Supawut Saichua, Chairman of the National Economic and Social Development Council, and he also a member of Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawat's Economic Advisory Panel. And finally, Francesca Rigalado. She is a former Bangkok correspondent with Nikkei Asia. So today's panel, we are going to discuss about what's happening next after Trump declared the trade tariff. But to make it short and concise and easy to follow, I decided the panel into two rounds. So the first round, we're gonna go to discuss about what is the worst case scenario of Thailand. And after that, for the second round, we are going to discuss about what is the best scenario of Thailand. So let's be pessimistic, and at the same time, let's be optimistic. Okay, so to kicking off, I would like to start from Kun Ploom. Okay, you're gonna start first, so please share your view with us.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I'll talk about let's go to the US, and I'm just gonna lay out my imagination of what could happen in the worst case scenario, which is something that probably will not happen. But to tell the whole story, I think you have to understand kind of where some of these ideas came from. And I think a good analogy is what's happening in the Department of the equivalent of the Ministry of Health. Because see, over time, what happens in society is that when a set of ideas is presented to the society as something that is good and normal, right, and is seemingly something that is supposed to be done and carried out by everyone, there's kind of a way to position yourself as a rebel against that norm. So I think what's gone down in the United States really after the COVID lockdown and the vaccine mandate is that you have an opportunity that presented itself to a populist politician that knew how to campaign. And what ended up happening is that if you look at what happened during the COVID lockdown and the vaccine mandate, there was a strong anti-vaccine movement because the COVID vaccine itself was questionable in terms of its effectiveness, right? And the very fact that there was an idea that you should be vaccinated 3 times, 4 times, and 5 times, people started rising up. And many people view the idea of the government telling them what to do when it comes to the mask mandate and the vaccine. Now, so if you're a politician and you're campaigning and you're trying to say that there is a set of elites that need to be removed, that I'm the guy who's going to be the political hero of everyone, who's tired of the lockdown, is tired of inflation, tired of including the vaccine mandate, the only way really to make yourself become more popular is to embrace that position that is the furthest to the fringe. Not only being an anti-COVID vaccine, that's too easy, but going all the way is to embrace the idea that vaccination itself is not necessary, even including things like measles, mumps, and rubella, right? Now, why am I talking about this? Because you're imagining the worst case scenario. So to me, I would compare the selection of Robert Kennedy Jr. to the position of the head of the Department of Health and Human Services as really the embracing of the fringe among really popular politicians of the quote-unquote libertarian right. Now, when you have something like that happening, the worst case, you're going to get people feeling that you don't need to get vaccinated against measles, and that it's really nothing more than chicken pox, right? But measles is much more dangerous. So you can have the spread of measles in various numbers of states, and then you'll probably have, the deaths of a couple of children, which has been the case. But if the U.S. president is willing to embrace an anti-vaccine person as the head of health and human services, as cool a guy as Robert Kennedy Jr. is, to me, that's the equivalent of embracing the idea by Peter Navarro that tariffs should be levied upon the rest of the globe to get rid of the trade surpluses of all of these developing countries, including Thailand, Japan, Vietnam, and of course China. The only way to make yourself into a political hero of a movement is to embrace the worst of the worst and the most unpredictable and the fringiest of all the ideas. Now, President Trump idolizes Andrew Jackson, right? Even more so than William McKinley. And if you go back to when Andrew Jackson became president, after John Quincy Adams, not only was there an implementation of these tariffs of abomination, which set forth a course of divisiveness with many of the southern states, Andrew Jackson was willing to use force to implement the tariffs, and eventually led to kind of a rebellion from South Carolina. South Carolina tried to nullify the tariffs, and President Andrew Jackson was willing to use force to show the other southern states how not to behave. Now, if you're talking about worst case scenario, you're not going to see something like that this time around, because the U.S. itself is a country in a way that is shaped differently now than during the Civil War, the pre-Civil War years. But if you're looking for a worst case scenario, in my imagination of what could become like the embracing of kind of the worst of the worst ideas and the craziest of the ideas, is that the thing that Andrew Jackson did that was remembered for the most and is idolized for by the far right libertarian, John Galt, Iran type of movement, is that Andrew Jackson essentially went to war and eventually dissolved what was then the US's central bank. And he basically didn't extend the charter for what was then known as the Second Bank of the United States. The Second Bank of the United States is effectively the central bank. And Andrew Jackson campaigned, and this will sound very, very familiar because it's done so in many countries by populist politicians. Andrew Jackson campaigned by saying that the central bank is really in cahoots with people who are on the opposite end of his political circles. The central bank, during Andrew Jackson's time, Andrew Jackson said was really working with Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams. The central bank is an institution of the elites that is in cahoots with the commercial banks. That message was used widely in all of these campaigns by Andrew Jackson, which led eventually to him shutting down the central bank. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, right, President Trump is not going to go nuts and then dissolve the Fed. But he does idolize Andrew Jackson. And he hates the idea that he cannot tell the Fed chairman to lower interest rate. I am telling you that the ideas espoused by Robert Kennedy is seen as gospel by many on the far right. Similarly to how the ideas put forth by people like, Glenn Beck and all these guys I follow. These guys talk about the Fed as some elitist institution that is in cahoots with some global world order that is also in cahoots with the major commercial banks. The Fed itself is seen by the far right in the US as an elitist institution that needs to go away. So worst case scenario, honestly, which I don't think will happen because I think President Trump will backtrack on many of these tariffs that is not targeted at China. But worst case scenario is that he will look at what happened with Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Jackson successfully dissolved what was then the equivalent of the Federal Reserve. And that lasted, that time with no central bank, lasted from 1836 until 1913. The US did not have a central bank for about 80 years. There was a time when the commercial bank, JP Morgan, was a lender of last resort. And eventually, after that crisis, there was a push to create the US Federal Reserve. And it finally happened during the times right a little bit before World War I. If I were President Trump, and I've gone nuts, which I think he has not, and I think he's selectively looking at the possibility of just targeting China, punishing China, and forcing the decoupling of multinational companies so that these companies can go elsewhere, can come to Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, right? Go anywhere but China. I'm thinking that President Trump will eventually embrace that first term mentality that use the tariffs to only punish the Chinese, do a full-scale trade war with them, and then embrace the friends, the allies like Thailand. But if he does not, if he goes through with this, with 30% on Thailand, 44% or 54% on Cambodia, the next move, if he's emboldened, to me, the worst of the worst, truly worst case, worse than all of this, which will not happen, but I'm just entertaining you, is the dissolution of the Fed. Because the dream on the furthest end of the fringes, and I listen to all of this because I follow many of these influencers, the dream on the furthest end is to end the Federal Reserve as we know it. Because the central bank is seen by populist politicians in many countries, including the current president. The central bank is a good scapegoat to tell poor people that that's where the rich people benefit from. So worst case is ending the Fed, which bring us back to the time of 1836 to 1913. And there was an industrial boom. That is something that President Trump views as a great thing. So that's how I start.
Hopefully it's
But
not
it will not
happen.
happen like that.
Okay, thank you very
But
much.
that's worst case.
Thank you very much, Khun Pum. It's such a wonderful opening speech. So from political analysis, we can move to from government side, but not just the government. We are going to start from opposition party side. Dr. Wirut gonna tell us what is the worst scenario of this situation you think is gonna happen?
Okay, I will fly all of you back to Bangkok and Thailand at the moment in time. So economy-wise, the big thing would be about the economic growth, because last year, as you know, Thailand got an economic growth of only 2.5%. That did not live up to the government's and also the people's expectations. But this year, last year, the main problem is domestic because of the household debt that negatively affect the automobile sectors, manufacturing sectors, and even though we export a lot and the consumptions also grew up, but the manufacturing still the pain point. But that's the last year issue, domestic one. This year, the domestic problems still here. But we also have the new problems internationally. And because the US market is quite big for Thailand, it's almost 1/5 or almost 20% of Thailand export. Increasingly from the post-1997 crisis, the US became the key points of export for the Thai economy. So that would mean a lot. And so we expect that a reduction of 1 or 1.5% in the GDP growth this year, which means this is the worst case scenario, right? So we could expect only 1 or 1.5% economic growth this year as the worst case. Not to say the stock market. You see the punch in the stock market. But what we are worried most would be the manufacturing sector that's already suffering last year. But this year, the worst case could be the huge layoff. Because if we think about the manufacturing sector that's export to the US, it's all the big manufacturing in the industrial district, right? In the electrical appliance, electronics, the hard disk drive, all these companies hire, each one would hire almost 1,000 labor. So the worst case scenario we may expect, because most of these firms, we are talking to them and they are waiting and seeing what would happen next. So they already reduced the work days. Some firms would cut it from 5 days a week to 3 days a week already in order to wait and see the situations. So according to the worst case scenario, that would affect the GDP growth 1 or 1.5 percentage point. And as an opposition party, we also like to highlight that not only the direct impacts that would affect the Thai economy, but there's also at least 3 levels of the indirect impacts also matters. First, most of the Thai people may not care about what would happen in Mexico last month, but actually we exported a lot of auto parts to Mexico before the final assembly to the US. So that would be the first indirect impact. Also China, because Thailand exported the raw materials such as the rubber from the south, the plastic pallets, before the final processing in China and exporting to the US. That would affect a lot from the trade between China and US. There's also the competition in other markets, because once the US market and the Chinese market simply close, then the other countries already looking for other blue ocean markets, such as Australia. Australia also the key point of export of the auto parts, the pickup truck from Thailand. That's also very long supply chain in Thailand. Before the last year, we were number one in exporting the auto and auto parts to Australia. But from last year, the other countries, competitors, such as South Korea, Japan, China, already targeting Australia as the new markets. So now, last year we dropped to number 3, number 4 already, which means that would be the fiercer competition in the other markets around the world, no longer blue oceans for the Thai exports. That's also the important indirect impact. Finally, there could be the more imported goods from China, could be the new round of the so-called China flooding, because China also needs the oversupply issue still there in China. And how could they find the easier market than Thailand? Even among the ASEAN countries, Thailand is the easier market to flood the cheap goods. And if the Chinese would do the depreciation game, that would mean their goods would be even cheaper than now, than last year. So we could be expecting the new round of the China flooding. These are like 3 or 4 indirect impacts that we think very important to raise the issues and propose to the government that not only that we focus on the US market and try to solve the issue, try to negotiate with the US, but we should also be aware of the indirect impacts. That's also very important for the Thai labor, the Thai manufacturing. So I may end the first round here for the worst case scenario.
Okay, thank you very much. We have seen that the opposition party issued the policy suggestion right away after the President Trump declared the trade tariff. But we have to wait for like 3 to 4 years until Dr. Supawut talk to the media that what's going next from the government side. So, Kun Supawut, please share us a bit like so far what has the government been doing and what is the next step for Thailand? What is the worst scenario that we are going to face?
I thought we were talking about worst case scenario.
Yes, but
all right.
Can you please share a bit about what the government has been doing until now?
Okay, let me address that part as well, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I have retired for many years already, so that's why I didn't want to come out really very much. But because I'm so old, I studied economics, and I knew that the Smoot-Hawley 1930 Tariff Act of the US resulted in global trade volume falling by two-thirds. And it took about 50 years after the formation of GATT and the World Trade Organization to pretty much undo all that. So the worst case scenario is exactly this, that you are going way back to the 1930s where you bring down the global trade volume. Probably you could really bring it down by 1/2. And I guess the implications have already been well outlined by Dr. Virayut in terms of the direct and indirect effects. I just need to mention that at the moment, Thai exports to GDP is 65.4%, export of goods and services, 65.4%. The data that I have furthest back goes to 1960, which probably is a good, proxy for what happened way back when. Thai exports to GDP was 16.1%. So you're talking about a possibility being forced to shrink the export sector to some magnitude. Obviously, hopefully not all the way to 16.1%, but who knows? Because pretty much the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930 did something to that effect for most countries. The other thing that happened during the 1930s was that countries left the gold standard, right? And of course, there was competitive devaluation. Again, 1945, the IMF set up under Bretton Woods system, basically had everyone fixing their exchange rate to the US dollar, which was fixed to gold until 1971, when basically President Nixon severed that convertibility. But we still decided to keep the dollar as the global currency. If President Trump's policy is in fact to be autarkic, he's just basically saying America would like to make everything itself and don't want to trade pretty much with many countries or any country, because that seems to be the case, right? He can't stand having any country having any trade surplus at all, and more, and we'll talk about the more part later. Then why would we need the US dollar as the world global currency when US is not trading with other countries? So you could have a situation where how is international finance going to proceed? How are we going to live in that situation? I don't know. That's the worst case scenario, in my view, right? In terms of the big picture. Now, after talking about all those big things, right, and talk about Thailand, such a small thing, not consequential at all in that sense, right? But obviously, Thailand needs to learn to live with the new US. Right? In terms of the details, let me go into that in the second round. But in the first round, I need to, I think, ask what is President Trump doing? What is he doing? And I think he's playing poker. He's playing poker. A big game. He wants to do one big win and reshape everything. And he thinks he had all the cards. What struck me when President Trump met with President Zelensky was he said to President Zelensky, "You don't have the cards to play." That stuck with me. President Trump thinks he has all the cards to play. That's why he's playing this game, this poker game. Why? US private consumption is $20 trillion, my estimate. That is equal to consumption in China, Germany, UK, Japan, India, France, Canada, and Italy combined. That's why he's saying, I have the biggest market. You guys have to submit. Also, the US is the world's biggest goods importer, as you know. We have the data, 4.2 trillion. And of course, the US exports less than its import, and import is the leverage. Import is the leverage. He has more ammunition because he imports more and export less. We export much more and we import much less. So he has the cards here too. And outside of trade, of course, he has many cards to play with other trading partners because he provides military protection, for example. That's why he was basically saying that you have to come and kiss the ring. I guess he didn't say kiss the ring, right? But that's why he was saying that foreign leaders essentially are groveling to avoid the new tariff and saying, please, please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything. In Thailand, I don't think we like to grovel. And my thinking is that even in the worst case scenario, well, if it's the worst case scenario, we don't need to grovel. In the best case scenario, we also don't need to grovel, I think. But in the best case scenario, timing would be the best thing. Now, what is our thinking? Well, as elaborated by Thai officials, including the Deputy Prime Minister, Kun Pichai, the Finance Minister, we have 5 pillars 5 pillars. The first pillar is our belief that we have comparative advantage in food processing, in which case the US is also one of the best and the most efficient exporter of agricultural products. So let's import more of US farm products, turn them into high quality foods. We could do those things. That's where our interests are compatible, right? Things we have to do, yes, the US is talking about reciprocal tariffs. We can bring tariffs down. The government has made calculations. We can cut tariff rates so that our average effective tariff rate is comparable to that of the US. Right? It's the US TR itself said that ours is 9%. We can bring that down to probably 2 to 3%. That's where the US tariff rate had been before President Trump's 2nd April announcement. So we could solve that problem with these tariff cuts. Obviously, they will have a lot of things to talk about in terms of non-tariff barriers. Again, a lot of it is concentrated in the agricultural side. This is where it gets sensitive. Here, obviously, is where we will have to talk to all stakeholders and see what we can do. But again, referring to the pillar 1, we are hoping to transform ourselves into using more US agricultural products and therefore be able to open our markets for the US in this even sensitive area. But I'm not going to underestimate the difficulty, the sensitivity, and the vested interest in Thailand on this side of things. Of course, we will also buy more stuff from the US in other parts, in other things. We've talked about ethanol, we've talked about oil, natural gas, and so on and so forth. There's even mention about armament. Those things are also going to be something that the Thai government is putting together as a package. Right? We do some investment in the US, and our companies might want to do more. That's where the government will also work with our private sector, including our interest in the Alaska pipeline, which is something that apparently President Trump is interested in. That's something we also wish to do. Now, let me end on this part by just saying that while President Trump is playing poker, the Chinese are playing tit for tat, right? Which is a different game. And here, if I may, I take you all the way back to a book written in 1984 called The Evolution of Cooperation. And this book is interesting in that the author, Robert Axelrod, had 2 computer tournaments where he had people submit their strategy to play iterated prisoner's dilemma. For those of you who are familiar with that, it's like basically if you cooperate, both of you get a good payoff. But if you both don't cooperate, you get the worst payoff. However, if you one cheat and the other one cooperate, the cheater gets a much better deal, right? The idea of this game is to ask computer experts throughout the world to submit a strategy that is the winning strategy. In the first round, the winning strategy was tit for tat. Tit for tat. Mm-hmm. So Mr. Axelrod did another one, but the second one, he told everyone that tit for tat was the one. And then in the second one, of course, many more people submit their strategy. Many more. In fact, 62 entries came in. Tit for tat still won. Tit for tat still won. Very simple tit for tat. Why did tit for tat win? Because it was one, nice. Never initiate a defection. Never start to be nasty. Number 2, it was forgiving. Every time the other side started to forgive, cooperate, he cooperated again. Third, it was provocable. It always retaliate. If you come to me badly, I will go back to you as badly as you did. And finally, it was clear, it was predictable, it was fostering trust. I think the Chinese are playing this long game to say that they are nice, forgiving, provocable, but clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe there's so many questions after this for sure, but let's move to Francesca. Do you want to share for this round or do you want to combine? After, okay, we will come back to her again. So back to Kun Bloom. Okay, let's have some hope for sure. We are looking to the best case scenario of Thailand. So what do you think about it?
Okay. I just want to add up to that. The problem is that you mentioned Smoot Hawley, but President Trump believes the golden era, and he said this repeatedly. He believes the golden era is between the time of Abraham Lincoln and Grover Cleveland. And that's the real industrial boom that he wants to see. He wants to see a reshoring of all of these companies that went offshore. The idea behind Peter Navarro's book, Death by China, is that the only way to deliver a death knell to the Chinese is to make sure that all of these multinational corporations bring the money back home to open factories in the US, to create a boom that is similar to what took place in the US between Lincoln and Cleveland. And he idolizes Andrew Jackson partly because he kind of believes that Andrew Jackson paved the way for this with the tariffs that he implemented on the South, even though the South didn't want it, right? Because the tariffs were meant to protect the manufacturing base. And I'll come back to Thailand, it's important. The tariffs were meant to protect the manufacturing base in the US, in the North. And he also said repeatedly, even back in 2015, that Andrew Jackson's legacy would have been better without the Civil War. Okay, so his idea is not the golden age being after the Great Depression and all of that, when Smoot Hawley was proven to be not workable and really lasted until 1934, 35. So what I'm saying is that he's not taking us back to 1930. He wants to take us back to 1830. Now, here's the thing. Best case scenario, which I believe is something that will happen, is that eventually he will realize, because of all the pressure coming from everybody, except for two people, literally two people in the administration that loves the tariffs. Howard Lutnick, the commerce minister, he's not in stocks, he's rich because of bonds, and Peter Navarro, the guy behind the idea that you could use tariffs to do away with trade surpluses of poor countries, which is junk science. You can't do it. If you do tariffs, punitive tariffs like this on poorer countries, you basically end up squeezing these multinational corporations to the point where they will cut production. If you do it on the entire globe at one time, you will force these companies into a position where they will not invest any further. They will not bring the factories back. And so my best case on this is that eventually the more intelligent business members of the business community, everyone from Dan Loeb to Ken Langone to Bill Ackman to Larry Fink to all of these rich investors that the president knows, including Elon Musk. All of these guys eventually will persuade Trump to divert back to the original strategy, which would work and will work. And the original strategy, before all of this went haywire off the beaten path, the original strategy is to levy these tariffs on the Chinese. That was the mandate. The election, he campaigned on fighting the Chinese to prevent an ascending China. The only way the punitive tariffs would work is to make sure that the tariffs on the Chinese is so harsh, 104% today, and that so harsh that all of these multinational companies, including Elon's, which has a plant in Shanghai, and including Apple, all of these guys would move their companies to Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, India. That strategy would work in trying to make sure that the Chinese is injured heavily with the tariffs. So my take on this is that I actually, at this point, I don't worry about Thailand. I listened to the finance minister explaining the plans, and that plan is absolutely awesome. It is groveling, but it's groveling in a way that shows President Trump that we are willing to help your exporters. Even if your exporters don't want to export to Thailand, we will help buy these internal organs of animals so that it can be sold in Thailand, which is entirely ridiculous to the point whereby we actually have the Thai economic team is doing the work of the commerce minister in the US, right? He's planning these export companies that will be created so that American products can be shipped here. We want to get American milk, we want American cars, we will get American corn, right? So I believe the plan of this government, once negotiations begin, I honestly believe President Trump and even Navarro would love this, because we're promising to import probably additionally 10 or 20 billion more US dollars of goods per year. We are intentionally decreasing the trade surplus for Thailand, which is not Thailand's job, but since you want it so much, we'll give it to you. We're such a good ally, right? So I don't worry about Thailand. I think we will survive this, and I think eventually President Trump will pivot to the original strategy which he wanted for term one. Just last point on this.
Okay.
The fallacy that took place after term one is that he tried punishing the Chinese, right? It didn't work very much. So he came in thinking that we're going to do full-blown. The only way to force a reshoring of multinational corporations is to make sure that all of these multinationals are injured so bad that they will leave every country, and that eventually we'll get more factories back home. This is how to recreate the era of Abraham Lincoln through Grover Cleveland, right? Now, so he went full-blown, and he will realize probably in about a week through his ears listening to all of these rich investors that this will not work, and that he's hurting multinational companies that are Americans that pay taxes to the American government, right? So I think he will pivot, and then Thailand will be spared, because if he doesn't pivot, this thing will not work. And the first casualties are not the Thai exporters. The first casualties, to me, are the American consumers and these multinationals. So I think he will pivot. That's the real scenario. Not best case. I think that's something that will happen. And I believe the negotiation team is willing to ingratiate itself to the US president enough to make him happy. I think we're going to do as good a job as probably Israel. Israel is saying that we're going to get rid of the trade balance. It's going to be a trade equilibrium, equal export and import, which is theoretically like impossible. You can't do that with trade. But Israel promises that. So I think we'll be fine. But the American consumers and companies will not be fine unless he pivots.
Thank you very much.
But the Chinese will not be fine in the short run.
Thank you, Khun Plum. Moving to Dr. Virayuth. Do you agree with Khun Plum that we don't have to worry much about Thailand? What is your point of view on this point?
Okay, we have to be optimistic now, right?
Yeah.
So my best case scenario would be international and domestic ones. Internationally, I would be dreaming that Thailand being key part in the redesigning process of the international trade and the global order. Because Thailand not in the international scene for a while, for almost a decade, not much influence, not taking part much in ASEAN, even with Myanmar, our neighbors, and so on. So my best case scenario would be Thailand step in and becoming the key part in redesigning this international order and make the ASEAN countries more united. And I would try to imagine the world without the US and China influence. What would happen? Could Thailand be more influential, playing a more role in Asia? That would be my dream. Domestically, I think that's more realistic that if Thailand, if the team and the government think hard and long enough, I think we can use the American products to increase competition in the Thai markets. You know that Thai markets full of monopolies, oligopolies, even in agriculture, chicken, maize, and so on. So if we decide the trade policy now as part of the restructuring process, we are talking a lot about economic restructuring. I think this is the right timing to do so. And if we grasp this opportunity to restructure the Thai economy, we could make the American products to increase our competition in the Thai markets. Also, I'm not sure, I may want to ask Dr. Supawut if, because according to the USTR report, there's one big issue about the service sectors. Is it on the table that do you think it's possible that we offer the telecommunication and banking? Would it play a role in the negotiation or not? And if we could do so, it would help, as you know, the telecommunications and the banking sector in Thailand is quite an oligopoly for a few decades. So if we can increase competition and also negotiate with the US, I think that would be my best case scenario domestically. At the same time, it would be a delight to see the Thai policymaker being more active in implementing the trade policy options. Because actually before the Trump tariff, we are fighting with the other countries in the international trade in an unfair manner. And actually there's a lot of trade policy options on the table, such as the countervailing duties, anti-dumping, the safeguard measures. We rarely use that kind of policy measures at all. We may use only the anti-dumping with the steel, but only a small part of it. But we rarely or never use the countervailing duties and the safeguard measure, even if we are facing the unfair trade practice. So my best case scenario would be domestic, would be twofold. On the one hand, I would expect the American products and companies to increase competition in the Thai domestic markets. On the other hand, I would expect a more active role in doing the trade policy, dealing with the unfair practice from elsewhere apart from the US. So that would be my best case scenario dream.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Supawut, do you want to answer his question first, or do you want to go on with your state first?
Well, let me try this optimistic scenario. Those of you who know me know that I am not optimistic. What is President Trump's policy? Trump 1 was basically targeting China, which resulted in China +1, right? China +1. In other words, we thought friendshoring was okay for the US. Then this current president, Trump 2, no, friendshoring is not enough. It has to be onshoring. Right? The problem is that China is so important that you cannot really force countries like Thailand and probably 60, 70 others whose trade relations with the Chinese run so deep that we could do that for the US. So I think there's something here that is fundamentally almost impossible to do. And again, I agree that the thing that will actually push President Trump perhaps to change his mind is the fact that the US economy too depends on many countries to supply relatively cheap products into the US market. And so, for example, estimates in the US were saying that these tariffs will lower income of, will lower the income of households, the poorest ones, by about $1,700. That's a lot of money for those low-income households that make about $40,000 a year. New home prices will go up $9,200. And the average household, all the US, will probably pay more by about $3,800 a year. I think that the optimistic scenario is these things catch up with him, catch up with the US president, and he knows that he cannot push this agenda as aggressively as he does at the moment. And then, some sort of an accommodation happens sometime, say, 6 months from now, where big countries, of course, get their relatively unique deals. Japan will get a deal that's different from the EU, for example, or Korea. But for relatively smaller countries like us, there will be a template where the US would basically say, okay, countries like Thailand, this is the sort of things that you'd like us to do. And these are the things that Thailand, in fact, could do going forward. Nonetheless, all these things will happen in the context of countries like Thailand needing to find options, because as our calculations indicate, we believe that Thailand's current trade surplus with the US, which amounts to about $45 billion US, we hope to be able to halve that by within the next about 4 or 5 years, which means that we will shift our trade pattern to other countries and regions, in which case existing regional frameworks like the RCEP, like the CPTPP, will become important for us to try and see if we could divert our trade to other countries. And other countries probably will believe in the same. So I can see a situation where these other regional cooperation mechanisms become much more active going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Please don't forget, after this round, we will open the floor for the Q&A session. So please think about your question after this. Francisca, please help us recap the panel today, and please share your thought as a trade reporter. What is the worst case and best case from this situation for Thailand?
Right. As my fellow panelists have been discussing the best case, the base case, and the worst case scenarios, I'm thinking ahead in a couple of quarters. How do we know whether Thailand has actually achieved the best case or the worst case scenario in its efforts to negotiate? And I'm speaking in my capacity tonight as a former trade reporter. Actually, I've been feeling so much FOMO this past week because I haven't been working on this massive story. If you don't know, FOMO means the fear of missing out. So instead, I've spent this past week answering questions from my fellow reporters who are jumping into this trade story for the first time. And, I'm being asked, how do we know who actually wins or loses from this tariff war? How do we know if Thailand is suffering more or doing better than its neighbors? Actually, we saw the first signs of what was to come as early as October in the trade data from that month. We get monthly trade data from the commerce ministries and from the central banks of Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore. And every October, annually, there is a spike in exports because we're coming to the end of the year. There are the holidays in the US, the big holiday sales, so everyone is shipping in that direction. But we compared, my former colleagues at Nikkei Asia and we compared the data from last October to the data from the years before. And there was a greater spike than the seasonal spike. What that told us is that American companies were placing a larger amount of forward orders because they were anticipating that in November, Trump would win the election. And so that export data is going to continue coming every month, and we'll see the breakdown of what products countries are sending and which countries they're sending to. And then the second sign that I would watch is the container freight rates, the shipping rates. Usually this goes up in the second half of the year, around September, when the seasonal spike in exports begins. But actually now they're too low. The shipping companies are doing things to drive up their rates by canceling stops at ports or canceling routes altogether. That should reduce the supply of containers and vessels, but it's not working. It's still not driving up the rates, which means that, because of the threat of tariffs and now the actuality of tariffs, people are delaying. No one's shipping out. And in Thailand, we usually get this report from the Thai National Shippers Council. And the third that I would watch are the imports that are coming in to Southeast Asia, particularly from China. What happens to the goods that China can't send to the US anymore? And this is the indirect impact on Thai manufacturers that Kun Virayut was talking about earlier. They go to developing countries that are unwilling or unable to put up trade barriers against China because they have a greater dependence on China for their own exports or for foreign direct investment. And then another thing that I've been seeing in this past week is sometimes there's a comparison of apples to oranges. We look at the numbers, like 49% tariff on Vietnam, 48% on Laos, 36% on Thailand, 17% on the Philippines. And does it seem that is the Philippines actually better off in that scenario, right? But then you have to ask, what are they making? You have to look at the breakdown of what are they making. Vietnam makes AirPods. Thailand sends car parts, machinery, and electronics components to the US. Cambodia sends garments. And is the Philippines actually better off because it has the lowest tariff rate, reciprocal tariff rate in the region? Well, right now, why isn't the Philippines a manufacturing powerhouse? It's geography. And that's why Thailand and Vietnam have the upper hand. It's easier to send a container ship to mainland Southeast Asia than all the way to the Philippines. And all of those questions factor into who has more leverage in a negotiation. Is it going to be Thailand? Is it going to be the Philippines? Is it going to be Vietnam? And in Thailand, it's always interesting to see the sector-by-sector data releases or reports from the Federation of Thai Industries. Like, for example, the Automotive Club and the Electronics Club of the FTI. There's always some interesting numbers that tell a really good story there. I know that we're going to Q&A.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I start the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sorry, still a reporter. I would like to ask my fellow panelists, aside from, the numbers to numbers negotiation that Thailand has to bring to Washington, what about the perception of Thailand's growing closeness, both politically and economically, to China? How does that affect Thailand's negotiating position with the Trump administration?
Who you want to answer your question?
I think that is a fact, right? That China is our biggest trading partner. I think we cannot deny that. And we are part of one of the many countries that also had benefit from the China plus one strategy that has been the case. But if you ask whether Thailand is too close to China for the US's liking, I think when you think about it, right, we still do almost annually Cobra Gold training. I think none of the other countries in Asia, not many countries in Asia have that tradition, have that regularly. And consultations and access between the Thai military and the US military has always been the case. We also always want to be more democratic, most of the time. I certainly do. And again, that is also compatible with what the US in general, I hope, still wants for itself and for Thailand and for other countries in the world. So there's a lot of commonality. I had been working with the Thai Foreign Ministry previously for about 17, 18 years. And I think deep down, Thailand always sees the US as an ally and a friend, a close friend. But you have to admit that the Chinese GDP had been growing double digit for the past 40 years, and they've become a big country, and they have also benefited us. In fact, let me be clear. While we complain a lot about China being much more competitive on industrial products, did you know that Thailand is the 5th largest exporter of food to China? We're actually number 5 in terms of the Chinese buying food, right? We have a niche in selling food to China, among other countries. And that relationship, I think, is a good one for Thailand, because with China's aging population, with them trying to focus their attention to manufacturing, they will forget to make enough food. And we will make enough food for us and for them, and we will try to do that. So there's things that we can do with the Chinese, which are, I think, of something that the US should not see as something evil or something that will in any way impede US overall interests globally.
Thank you. I would like to ask one more question for Dr. Prayut before we will open the floor for the Q&A session. So from the People's Party, back then you were like a Move Forward Party. You used to propose the policy which called a Made with Thailand. But after this trade declared, do you think it's going to be the same? Or do you think we should adapt that policy into the new world?
Thank you.
So please inform us a bit about Made in Thailand, Made with Thailand.
So Thailand usually used to the motto in manufacturing terms, the Made in Thailand. It's like made in the US, right? We want the production to be inside the area of Thailand. But in the previous election, we proposed the ideas of changing from the Made in Thailand to Made with Thailand, meaning that rather than thinking about the domestic area as the key component of the policy, right? We have to invite everyone to produce all the things in Thailand before exporting them. We should think about how to be part of each global supply chains. You don't need to produce everything or the final assembly in Thailand, but how about being part? For example, you may think that Nokia and Ericsson already die, but no, they actually own a lot of patents enough to still be alive. So that's also show you that if you are at some necessary part in the supply chain, you can still survive in the fierce global competitions. So I like to, at that time, we proposing that Thailand should rethink about the relationship with the global supply chain. For example, in automobile, if we compare to, if you focus on the made in Thailand concept, we would try to invite all the Chinese EV firms to Thailand and produce almost everything inside Thailand, becoming the EV hub and exporting the EV cars to elsewhere. In my view, that's still like the old concepts of the productions. If we think differently, if we think about it as a made with Thailand, then we don't need to invite all the Chinese EV firm to come here. We just try to focus on only some part, the key part in the EV supply chains, and just focusing on producing that. So that would kind of the different concepts, which I think is still possible, even more in the era of the fiercer global trade war. So I think it's still a possible way to think about how to do the trade under the trade war.
Okay.
But I want to highlight some more point that actually the relationship between, the trade relationship between Thailand and China is quite dynamic. Once at the time China entered WTO in 2001, at that time Thailand got a lot of benefit because Thailand exporting the raw material and also importing the raw material to be processed in Thailand, and then we export elsewhere. So in the first 10 years after China got into the World Trade Organization, we could say that Thailand benefit from the relationship with China. But then it's quite dynamic, so it's changing a lot. For example, in terms of the petrochemicals, 10 years ago, we were running the trade surplus with China on the petrochemical. But in the past 10 years, we're running higher and higher trade deficit on petrochemical. So I mean, the relationship with China is quite dynamic, and we have to adapt to that kind of dynamics too. That's why I'm talking about how to use all the policy options possible to deal with the unfair, not about fair one. So we have the clear line that there's a fair and unfair trade practice internationally. Because China also doing the countervailing duty with the other countries too, India too. So I think it's quite based on the fair trade practice. And so I think Thailand could do more with the all policy options that we have.
Thank you. So we now open the floor for the Q&A session. The microphone is over there. Please identify yourself, what is your affiliation, and direct to the panelists you want to ask the question. And please limit the statement. More question, please.
Peter Jansen, Business Times of Singapore. Kun Supavut, I address this to you. Thank you very much for your presentation and for attending tonight. Yeah? You mentioned very, very briefly in your first statement the use of the US dollar in trade. Thailand wants to, or expressed an interest in joining BRICS. Trump has already come out saying anyone who tries to undermine the dollar is going to face his wrath or whatever. Yeah. How does Thailand stand on this? And I mean, if China and Russia try to, I think the push to get a counter currency to the US dollar is very difficult and faces its own obstacles. But what sort of a stance will Thailand take if this turns into a real issue? If China starts selling U.S. Treasury bonds and whatnot, I mean, it could turn into a real debate. Yep.
Well, thank you. Of course, I'm not privy to what the government why the government decided to do that to join BRICS. But my thoughts are BRICS is long way from doing anything that will replace the U.S. dollar. As I mentioned in my initial remarks, the U.S. dollar will decline because the U.S. itself will not behave properly. I think that's where it will become a situation where people decide whether they trust the U.S. dollar, whether the U.S. dollar and the U.S. bond market is something that they will feel secure with. And again, I think as an economist, I think that you dethrone the dollar by your own monetary policy and whether your Federal Reserve remains independent, right? And that's not what any other country can do. So it's up to the U.S. itself. The U.S. can easily retain dollar supremacy, but apparently, right, the U.S. Current U.S. thinking seems to say that this is a burden, right? This is what Steve Miran basically says. It's a burden, and the proposal, the so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord, was to charge us, right, for using the US dollar. And that's where I think it gets serious. If you want to charge us for using the dollar, then we might decide, the rest of the world might decide, hey, is there a better alternative? Short of that, I don't see any other country really being able to challenge the dollar. So I don't know if President Trump needs to worry at all whether we join BRICS or not, or whether BRICS can in any way, shape, or form do anything to replace the dollar.
Next, please.
Yes, James Tratier. I'm a former Canadian diplomat here in Thailand and Myanmar and North Korea and South Korea, where I led ratification efforts for the Canada-South Korea Free Trade Agreement. And my question is really a two-part question. Given that President Trump has basically ignored and shredded the Canada-Mexico-US Free Trade Agreement that he himself negotiated and signed, how can Thailand or any other country be confident about the durability of any deal they make with him? And the second part is, are you concerned about the negotiating bandwidth of American negotiators in the Trump administration, that Trump will be focused on making deals with his major trading partners and that Thailand and other smaller countries may be marginalized in the process?
Confirm.
Well, basically, it's like this. Well, honestly, I'm kind of an optimistic. I'm a little bit optimistic on this. I think this is not a joke, but it's not a joke. It sounds like a joke, but it's President Trump's daughter, Ivanka, likes to vacation in Thailand. Not a joke, but it's these things are good. So actually, and the last time she was here, she had a great time. She went to, I'm known as the local Trump expert, the Trump explainer. But basically, she had a great time. She went to PP Island and Riley Island in the south, I think with her husband. And they went back and they had a very memorable experience. And I think, honestly, Kun Thaksin has kept pretty good relations with many of his business colleagues or the businessmen internationally that he's known. So I don't view Trump having any negative bias towards Thailand in the way that he does for some reason for the United Kingdom or the Chinese. He hates the Chinese for some reason, even though he used to make his products there. So I think, honestly, he has a soft spot for places that are not necessarily democratic, and is a little bit traditional in its ways. So he has a thing for a hierarchical society. So I think the Thai government will be able to, I think, do its best, and it will suffice as long as we get in the queues, and as long as the Prime Minister takes herself there. I think we will be able to, without a doubt, secure 10%. We won't be slapped with 37%. The only thing that people are worried about is that the White House is not willing to extend a period of 90 days, which was the rumor yesterday during trade, right? That's part of the reason why the stocks went up briefly, was because there would be a 90-day reprieve, which would allow Thailand, Israel, Japan, all these countries that don't have a problem with the U.S. to work a deal. And we could work a deal taking about a month, and Japan would get a deal. He loves Japan. He hates the Chinese, he likes Japan. He likes Israel. He doesn't like the UK. So his personal bias will dictate whether or not we would get 37% or 10%. It's not logical, right? And Navarro does not like the Vietnam proposal because the Vietnamese proposal would lower tariffs to zero, which is not the point. They want a country that is going to create a plan to buy American products, steaks to milk to cars, right? So we are proposing that plan. We are going to create companies that will help export products from the US, even if Americans don't want to do it. So Thailand is very good at this because we actually help exporters in Thailand export to other countries, right? So we're going to do that for Americans. And Trump will love that. It's crazy batshit stuff that other countries don't do, right? I'm telling you, the EU is sitting there saying to themselves, why is it our job to help American exporters? Thailand is creating a strategy that will help American export more beef, more milk, more cars, which is Howard Lutnick's job, right? We'll do all that. So I don't worry about Thailand, but the very important point that I'll add later is about the stance with the Chinese and other stuff. So that's my answer to that.
Thank you. Next one, please.
Craig Francis, a freelance journalist. Ties in a little bit with question one, but currency related. But currency movements obviously have a huge impact on trade. I'm thinking if Asian currencies depreciate against the US dollar, that actually makes their products more attractive to Americans, which undermines the whole tariff thing. If nothing changes in terms of Trump doing a flip-flop and reversing all this, if it stays as it is, where do you see the Thai baht going, and what implications does that have for this whole tariff-related issue?
That's the most difficult question ever, right? You cannot predict currency movements. I know I cannot, sorry. But I think what we've seen is something quite strange because normally the country imposing the tariff, the US, will lead to the US dollar strengthening, but that had not been happening in the past 2 weeks or so, or even the last week or so. So I think there's something there, and even the US 10-year bond yield spiked. Again, that was not supposed to happen because normally there's a flight to safety. There's a concern whether there's some technical factors or whether there's some erosion of US confidence in the US dollar. That's something to be answered. Something to be answered, not at the moment. Otherwise, in general, I think the countries like Thailand, we should be more concerned about the big picture. As Dr. Virayut said, there's going to be a lot of direct and indirect impact, and there's going to be concerns about possible layoffs and so on and so forth. So monetary policy in Thailand is probably going to be more focused, and even fiscal policy on trying to make sure that we minimize the negative short-term impact of these tariffs on the Thai economy, on employment, on wages, and so on. I think that's where we will be focused on in particular. To answer the previous questioner's points, let me answer number 2 first. Right? Will Thailand be marginalized? I think this is a good question. I am concerned, and I think the Thai government is very concerned. But the problem is this. You go in too soon, and President Trump feels he still has all the cards, and he will be tough because he feels he had all the cards. Remember, he's playing poker, and he thinks he has all the cards. Of course, if we're too late, we could be marginalized. So timing will be everything. Timing will be everything. In answer to your, which I can't give you a more definite answer because I don't know, but my thoughts are, you look at what the US Republican senators and Republican congressmen are saying. You look at what his voter base are saying. Are they complaining about the inflation? Are they complaining about all sorts of difficulties that come from these tariffs? I think they will come. As an economist, I'm pretty certain that all sorts of bad things will happen within the next 3 to 6 months. And that's when we make this timing. Of course, as I understand it, the Thai government already have been in touch with the USTR, and we will soon begin negotiations. But you know, negotiation and serious negotiation can be two different things for both sides. Second, your first question was, can in fact we rely on his word, is what you're asking, right, on his agreement. The short answer is yes, because once he wins this, he thinks he wins this poker game, which is the tariff. He will move on to another poker game, which is to extend his tax cut. So once he thinks he's got it, fine, he will leave it for the officials and the others to manage, I believe. And he will move on because he has bigger and better things to do. Thank you.
This is a strategy that I would add that I think the Thai government will be quite good at as a culture. It's like seriously, even better than the Chinese, because the Chinese is choosing to fight this, right? But Thailand has a way as allowing you to think you're winning, right? Right? Japan came into Thailand, and then eventually, after World War II, Japan is out, right? It lost the war. So I think we will be able to manage President Trump's ego, basically. But on the point of the dollar, and I think the important thing is this. The idea of having a rich country gaining like a trade surplus with all of these poor countries is like ridiculous, right? It's junk science. You cannot do it. Rich countries import, they consume, right? It's us who make these cheap goods. But Navarro was convinced that this would work, right? But if it works, it means the US does not want to be a country with a strong dollar. So that's why you had a brief period where investors were thinking that this is a new strategy and paradigm shift, and that the US, and that is really the stance of the White House to have a weak dollar, and then the financial capital of the world would have an official policy of a weak currency. So I think once that realization came in that would be ridiculous, right? And then all the other Asian currencies would be strong. Then people start thinking that this whole thing will be thrown out the window in due time. But be that as it may, that means the short term, the baht is facing pressure, and it would strengthen. And then that would require probably the Central Bank of Thailand to step in and intervene a little bit. I think that's what's happening in the medium term. But in the long term, once the US pivots a little bit, then the dollar's back, and then there won't be appreciative pressure on Asian currencies. That's my view.
Thank you, Khun Bloom. Next one, please.
Leighton Tonkin, designation student. I'm curious around, we've obviously focused on the next 4 years and we're bracing for it, but I'm curious around Trump's inevitable successor. Do you think that the Republican Party will stick with the tariffs, assuming he doesn't get a third term in that unique political move? Do you think that the Republican Party will stick by these tariffs, or do you think once Trump has finished his terms that perhaps they will drop this ideology and move to a more open, less painful route?
How about the third term?
Ideally, no third term.
Let me get a crack on this, because I'm trying to persuade local listeners of my program that to answer you briefly, the tariffs in the way that is being implemented is not a mandate of that the president got through the election. So I'm trying to convince local Thai people who listen to my program that they have to separate between these ideas that are not going to work, that came from Peter Navarro and Donald Trump, and the rest of MAGA Republicans. The rest of MAGA Republicans, like like Ben Shapiro, like Dave Portnoy, like Bill Ackman. If you ask 99% of economic professors who are Republicans, right? If you ask the Nouriel Rubinis of the world, or if you ask Larry Kudlow on Fox Business, who's interviewing Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, none of these guys buy into this whole tariff scheme. The mandate for this presidency is to go after the Chinese, go after the real ascending power that could rival the US in the long term. So you could do 200% on Chinese. The Republicans would be all in favor of it, right? So the short answer to your question is that if it weren't for two guys, President Trump and Peter Navarro, these sets of tariffs would be gone. You would have it on the Chinese, you would have it on the real enemies of America. Not Thailand, not Vietnam, not Israel, not the UK, not Germany. So it's really Trump trying to prove a point that he can bully the world, but he will be proven wrong because he can bully the Chinese. If he can get Thailand and Vietnam and the UK and Israel and Japan on board, that would work. So the rest of the Republicans know that. And all of the party donors know that. So what I'm trying to tell the Thai people is that they have to separate the US itself and the Republican Party and even MAGA Republican. They have to separate all of that from these sets of tariffs. So basically I'm trying to tell the Thai government to think long term. The US is still, to me, an indispensable ally of Thailand, even more so than the Chinese. But in the short term, it seems like because of this president and his behavior doesn't help. This president is allowing an opportunity for the pro-Chinese and the pro-Russian provocateurs in Bangkok to get an opportunity to shake down the Bangkok intelligentsia and the networks around the elites to turn their backs on the United States. So what I'm trying to tell locals basically is that if there's no Trump, if there's no Navarro, or basically if Trump turns around and ditches the plan, then everything is back to normal to me. So it's not a paradigm shift. It's basically Trump gone rogue because he's been talking to Navarro too much. I mean, Musk is representing the point on this. So the tariffs will not continue as is. It will focus on the Chinese and the quote-unquote real enemies. Not the actual real enemy, but the real enemies. And the real enemies do not include Israel, Thailand, Vietnam, the UK, EU. So eventually, President Trump will have to wake up to that. And eventually he would, I think.
So many more questions.
Let me
Yes, please.
add to this. The question was whether President Trump's very conservative agenda will continue. That was something I pondered as well. And there was an interesting news piece where there was a symposium in Singapore. And one of the speakers was a person called Stephen Kotkin of the Hoover Institute. And this is what he said. Right? The US is 5% of global population and 25% of global GDP, but 50% of global military spending. Now, US military spending at the moment is 8% of US GDP, which is now equal to the 8% US spend on interest expenses on the public debt. In other words, the US is having a problem sustaining its current defense spending. It cannot protect the world the way it is doing right now, in the minds of people on the conservative side of the US politics. Europe is 7% of global population, 17% of global GDP, and 50% of global social spending. That's why President Trump is so much on Europe's case by saying that you have to spend to protect yourself because you are spending already too much to help your people at the US expense. Right? In other words, they even made an estimate that Europe has been pocketing $350 billion a year in US security assurances for the past 30 years. I think, unfortunately, this conservative agenda on in the US will continue going forward. Thanks.
Next question, please.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm an ex-Marine stationed in Okinawa, Japan. I study at the University of Maryland for economics. And my question to you is, how does China protect itself against these tariffs? And is there a recalculation in the Chinese long-term plan due to these tariffs? That is my question.
Please keep it concise because of a lot of questions.
I think Khun Prem talk about China have to do a tit-for-tat strategy. I think they have to do so, right? In the short term, if you are China, you have to do something against the U.S. for now. So I think, in a way, President Xi Jinping and President Trump got into the same trouble of the succession plan. So I think both of them are fighting for the short-term legacy. They both want to make a legacy of their own before ending the term. For President Trump, I think the political project is quite clear. He wants to make the budget surplus and the trade surplus by a series of policies, starting with the tariff, as Dr. Sabu said, and then after finish this one, he will move on to do the tax cuts. So at the same time, China is quite successful. If you remember the Trump 1.0, at that time, China still relied very much on exporting to the US. But China also realized that they got to rely less and less on the US, and quite successful in doing so now. So they care less about the US. So in summary, I think both the US and China care less about each other than the rest of the world. So I mean, they brought the problem to the world, but then they themselves not have much into that problems anymore. But the rest of the world still there to sort it out. So that would be my thinking.
I just want to add that I think that the trade war itself is, to me, in the long term, is not that hurtful to the Chinese, because the Chinese has plenty of markets to go to, right? So I think they would survive it, basically. It's like it would hurt trade with the US, but they have enough, they have enough intelligence, basically, and long-term planning to find plenty of markets around the globe, because they have cultivated, many very friendly trade partners around the world. But be that as it may, basically, if I'm the United States, the route of punishing the Chinese and blocking the American market is interesting. It would work, but then again, it would work only if the U.S. does not alienate other allies in the way that it is doing. But so I just want to add to that point.
Again, it's a tough question. I think that what President Trump has done is basically to instantaneously sever any economic relations between China and the U.S. already with these tariffs, right? These tariffs make it impossible to trade. And so I think the Chinese seem to say, okay, let's see how tough you are and how tough we are. And I think that's going to be the thing that we'll have to watch going forward in the next maybe year or two, because the Chinese don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to grovel. Now, having said that, though, what will actually happen beyond this? I think it interestingly could make things better for the global economy, because what the Chinese have been doing, as you know, has been exporting excess capacity, and in fact overproducing manufactured products. I think they might have to decide, okay, I can't do this anymore. I do have to stimulate domestic demand. In fact, they might have to decide whether they want to stimulate domestic demand for other countries to want to come into the Chinese market if the Chinese see this as an opportunity to replace the US as a global power. So it might be the case that they decide to say this could be seen as an opportunity. They certainly have the size for it. They certainly have the size for it. Now, can they sustain taking on the US, if you will? Chinese export to the US is 2% of China's GDP. So I think it is possible. But I think the Chinese also always are willing to talk if the US play nice. The US so far has not played nice. And they also know they can hurt the US in terms of their selective so-called permission needed for export of rare earth. And I think that will also be a critical factor going forward to see which country is more able to sustain this severance of the trade relationship between the world's two biggest economies. Unfortunately, while this is going on, we will go into recession first before them. Thank you.
But the point that Dr. Saboot made is important, that the 2% reliance on the US market for the Chinese. They will survive this, but then eventually somebody intelligent in the White House will tell the president that China as a market could in the long term replace the US as a major trading partner for all of these poor countries who are punished unfairly by the US. So the pivot eventually, within, it could be a month, it could be 2 or 3 months, it will eventually happen where the White House will pull back and say that we're not going to punish Thailand and Vietnam and Bangladesh and Pakistan anymore because they will all simply turn to the Chinese. So I think that's eventual. So in a way, hopefully the good scenario is that we're going to see this very exciting trade war between the US and China, which is fun to watch as a reporter. But then honestly, both sides will be okay, right? That's a point, the only problem in all of this is that they're doing the tariffs on the poor countries, not the Chinese. The Chinese will be okay. The Americans will be okay, as long as the Americans can import stuff from other countries. The problem now is that they're not pivoting yet, but they will. Because eventually somebody more intelligent than Navarro will tell the president. Even Musk, everybody else in the White House basically, it's not Navarro. So not Navarro and Ludwig, whoever has the ears, eventually it will happen. So that's why I said that Thailand will eventually get probably 10%, no more.
Peter Trainer, I'm a club member. I just want to refer to some of the points that you've made already. I saw an interview on the BBC today where they were interviewing a Chinese economic spokesman, how they were going to respond to the 104% duty. And as part of the answer, the spokesman was saying that he was very disappointed with the quality and the expertise of the advisors and the consultants who were advising President Trump, that they seemed to be incompetent or uneducated because they were proposing things that were economically or politically impossible. The numbers didn't add up. So my question to the panel is, does Thailand, does the current government and the opposition have enough technical expertise in the form of economists or people with international political expertise to be able to plot a short-term and a long-term course to deal with what Trump's doing, to develop a financial plan and a plan B to cope with what's happening? And the second part of the question is, whatever level of expertise the government have, should they be taking a more proactive part in ASEAN to form a more robust response to whatever's happening in the world? Thailand was very active in setting up ASEAN, but they've been very reactive over the last few years. They haven't taken a lead in anything, they've just responded. So that's the two parts of the question. Have you got the expertise? Is it available? And should it be used in ASEAN to provide better defense for the country's economy?
Well, from what I have seen, I think that the expertise part is not that challenging. What is challenging is vested interest in the case of Thailand. And in terms of the expertise, in fact, let me just mention one thing, that the USTR, I think you might have seen the USTR's formula, right? With the theta and with the epsilon and the phi, those Greek letters. I think their expertise is quite questionable in the sense that the phi, the Greek letter phi, which is the elasticity of import prices with respect to tariffs, they said it was 0.25. Basically what they're saying is that for tariff to go up by 1%, prices will go up by only 0.25%, which is probably very wrong. And therefore, they have underestimated, I think, the impact of inflation on the U.S. economy, because the pass-through will be not one in four, but probably 1 to 1, or close to that, given the dollar was already weakening, as we mentioned earlier. So I think in a sense, I'm not as concerned about the expertise part, but I am concerned about the different interests that we have to reconcile, and even the U.S. side has to reconcile in these negotiations. Also notice that the USTR actually has, I think, as I understand it, during my time in Washington, they had 200 civil servants. They are going to negotiate it with 180 countries, right? Oh, sorry, no, the penguins don't count, right? But probably 60, 70 countries at least, and you have 200 civil servants. I don't know if Elon Musk has fired any of them or not. So that's where the difficulty comes. And think of it, every country, every 60 of these countries have different rates. And the rates apply to different products differently. Think of the permutations in terms of actually collecting the tariff and so on. So it's more, not so much the lack of expertise or the challenge of expertise, it's the amount of work that the US authorities will impose on themselves under this tariff program. And the concern is whether they have time to talk to us, because they'll have so many things, complex things to deal with going forward with all these different tariff rates on different countries and different products. Remember, there's going to be something different on semiconductors, on aluminum, on car parts. It boggles the mind in terms of this complexity. Thank you.
The finance minister, I just want to add to the point that Dr. Supawut made. The finance minister is quite intelligent. He's very good. He's actually listed out all of the non-tariff barriers that Thailand has, when we have a lot of them. And one of the byproduct of this fiasco is that we're going to get rid of these non-tariff barriers for the U.S., which would be taken care of had we had negotiated a free trade agreement a long time ago, which the Thaksin administration wanted to do it, but there was so much protests from local farmers. But so we're going to open up and liberalize trade more with the U.S., which will be kind of good. So the expertise is there to go line item as to the kind of things that we need to do. It's almost like we have too much expertise on making these plans to help American exporters, and we'll do that too. And so the real fear is like what I mentioned earlier, is that there is these local pro-Chinese, pro-Russian provocateurs who are trying to get the government to go big on this. And to go big is to be kind of like Mahathir Mohamad, to be like, okay, we're going to rally ASEAN together, and we're going to negotiate with the US together, and then we're going to show them that Thailand is the new leader of this corner of the globe, right? So there's a push to do that at the networks of the elites. But the government at this point is quite aware that Thailand is still a major non-NATO ally, and eventually President Trump will be gone. This is an aberration, and eventually the president will come to realize what is in American interest. At the moment, he's kind of out of it because of a lot of bad advice and because of ideological hubris on believing in tariffs. Eventually, there will be a post-Trump era where the tariffs will not be targeted against Thailand and freer trade. So no big ASEAN affront yet, not the time yet, even though there's a push for that locally to be anti-American and to rally all of ASEAN together under the Thai leadership, which sounds cool, but it's too risky at this point.
All right, good evening, speakers. Thank you for all being here today. My name is Napat Kongsawat from NHK. I guess this question is geared towards Dr. Supawut as a member of the administration, or at least administration adjacent. We've seen two types of responses to these tariffs from countries around the world. We've seen countries run to negotiate with the US, but we've also seen countries turn to their regional partners in their bloc to try to coordinate a response. How would we evaluate ASEAN's response, and would regional interests and national interests align for member nations? This is also open to the other speakers. Thank you.
I think as you saw, right, the country's natural instinct is to try to negotiate with the US in the hope that we could forestall those tariffs. Now, I think that logic is flawed because it assumes that you can go back to the status quo ante, sorry, the status quo that was pre-Trump too. I think that assumption is wrong. But eventually but you have to learn. You have to learn by your mistakes. So as the Financial Times reported, none of the countries that quickly tried to negotiate with President Trump succeeded so far, none, right? I think eventually countries will reassess their position and see if there are other options. Now, some countries still don't feel that that's the case from what I've seen from the news flow that came out. For example, the Koreans are clear that they don't want to do anything like that, any cooperation with Chinese or the Japanese is not in their intent. They still believe that you can deal with President Trump bilaterally. So I think there's going to be a more natural evolution of things going forward. Again, a lot depends on what President Trump will do as well. We are going to be hopefully seeing some sort of deals get to come out. And I'm sure every country will evaluate that deal. For example, suppose it's a deal with Japan. We will see what the structure of the deal look like, which we will know what the US really wants. So far, we don't know, right? So far, we really don't know. Because we thought, because apparently the Vietnamese and the Cambodians thought President Trump wants zero tariff. He said, no, it's not just only zero tariff. It's also circumvention. So what does that mean in practice? Does it mean that anything made by China in Thailand is not to be sent to the US, or what sort of a criteria is it? And then, we will all start to see if that's what the US wants, whether we could have a better alternative, better options in terms of talking to other countries. I think that's how it will evolve going forward. And at the same time, the US might also change its mind going forward as well. Again, so it's a dynamic process that needs to I think gel, and for all of us to decide how we can go our separate ways. Will ASEAN take the lead? Obviously, the ASEAN chairmanship now is under Malaysia, right? Prime Minister Anwar will be the one who will steer us going forward, and I think Thailand will be always willing to work very closely with Prime Minister Anwar because of the close relationship that he enjoys with the leadership of the Thai government.
Can I add?
Yes, sure.
The thing is this, the U.S. and Thailand relationship in the long term is stronger than the relationship among ASEAN countries. That's the thing. There's a military cooperation between the U.S. and Thailand. We got military exercise. We got a state-to-state relationship that is quite strong, even tested, by a few eras, including this era. But ASEAN as a whole has not ever been proven to be successful at any international mission that is legitimately serious. So it is fun to flirt about Thailand leading ASEAN as a whole to challenge the US. But that ain't happening. As a regime, Thailand is still with the US. That's the thing. So, but it's different how you view this. If you view this as a local who's never lived in the US, you might view this as a representation of America. But if you grew up in the US, you know that this is an aberration, right? You don't get people, being taken, their visas revoked while they're students, and getting put into trucks and then going into detention centers. I view the whole tariff scheme as an aberration, similar to how the US government is deporting these gang members who are not gang members. So I take a little bit of an optimistic view of the US, meaning that the entire set of policies eventually will be proven illegitimate, including taking away student visas of pro-Palestinian supporters. This is an aberration, but it's an aberration that will last a while. But eventually the Republican Party will be better. So I view that from an American lens, believing in America. I don't think the turn for the worse is any at all permanent. It's really during this particular era. So that's why I tell the Thai government to stay on course, don't go too big. Don't go ASEAN yet.
Just only two more questions. Okay.
Hi, I'm Sen. I'm a big news journalist working for the BBC. You've always touched on the ASEAN matter, so I kind of want to take a different spin. You talk about ASEAN having a collective response under Malaysian Prime Minister, but some people might have doubts about what is the so-called unity in ASEAN. You talk about trade. All the ASEAN members are also competitors. So in that sense, how do you balance between having a collective ASEAN response to US tariffs, but also, having your stand as a competitor in trade in the region? And if Thailand is going to play on the second group, how is it going to arise as a competitor, as a more appealing destination for FDI in this very, very particular environment? If so, in what products and what fields? Thank you. I would like to direct this question to Mr. Subabut and Virayuth. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, again, I think we defer to the chairman of ASEAN, which is the Prime Minister Anwar, for this, because he's going to be the one driving the agenda for this year. But as I said, I think Thailand will be extremely cooperative with whatever he decides to do. I think we will be working closely with him going forward. But I take your point that obviously it's going to be difficult to try to reconcile competing instincts and objectives of the various countries. I think I have no doubt that that's going to be very challenging. Every country wants to save itself first, right? It's very true. And I was been working with the foreign ministry for 17 years, and I've been in many ASEAN meetings, and I know getting consensus is not easy. However, again, if things do evolve the way I think it will be, and people do realize that we will not go back to pre-Trump US anymore. That's my thinking. Then we will really have to think of other options. And there are other options beyond ASEAN. I mentioned RCEP, and I mentioned CPTPP as well. So actually, you probably have to think well beyond ASEAN for this new reconfiguration of what we do in the Asia-Pacific region. Yeah.
To me, I think don't think about using ASEAN as kind of the united ASEAN that's okay, we are coming together, remove all the tariff from us. No, it would not be possible. But there's a way to negotiate. For example, how about we negotiate something to cap the upper limit of the highest tariff rate? Or shall we reduce 20% reduction for each country? That kind of thing, in exchange for something together with the ASEAN markets. So I'm thinking about ASEAN as one of the possible cards, but yes, not like a united ASEAN, but we could do something with it, in my view. And yes, I think Thailand should need to think beyond ASEAN. That how about Thailand plus Korea plus Japan in some supply chains, such as say semiconductor, or Thailand with Australia with the dairy products, for example. So multilateral things could benefit, but you have to negotiate with them. Yes.
Final question, please.
Hi, Rebecca Ratcliffe from The Guardian. In Thailand, I wondered which companies or sectors do you think are most vulnerable? And second question, when we look at the context across Southeast Asia, which countries do you think have the least leverage when it comes to negotiations with Trump?
Well, I think if you get hit with 36% tariff, all industries are vulnerable. Because as I understand it, margins of exporters are not anywhere close to that. So yes, I think all will have problems going forward. But then there are some countries, some types of exports that may be able to shift themselves quite quickly. For example, those of Chinese companies might be able to shift somewhere else or decide that they don't have to export from Thailand because we don't have that benefit for them anymore going forward. Some might be products that are necessities. Thailand actually exports a lot of food and consumer items to the US. Those might still be able to export even with these high tariffs because other countries might even have the same high tariffs, but obviously the volume will go down. And then the biggest component is electronics, right? That's US companies, mostly US companies, hard disk drive companies. They too will have to defend for themselves. Maybe they'll have to really lobby very hard to see what they can do in terms of making sure that they can still continue to sell from Thailand. And hard disk drive, for example, it's something that the US itself have to think hard about because, as you know, data centers, which of course store data, have to use a lot of hard disk drive to store the data. And you know that artificial intelligence, right? The development of artificial intelligence, in particular, training large language models means you have to have a lot of data. So it is in the US's own interest to get the best and the cheapest hard disk drives, which we are making. So there are things like that that I think will eventually factor into the equation. But otherwise, 36% tariff is bad. It's probably something that will have a very strong adverse impact on all of Thailand's export to the US. I don't think we can escape that.
But just looking at these products, it's inconceivable that once the president actually sees the products, he would slap the 37%. There's no way Washington will not pivot. It will not happen because we're not competing with them. We've got these Mercedes-Benz automobile plants in the US, right? So it needs all of these little parts. So eventually, when you look at the items, and once we propose the plan, they will not implement the tariffs. It will not happen. At tops 10% on some products. So, and once that happens, then you get a domino effect of many other countries getting the reprieve, and then it's back to the original strategy where only China and a few others would be punished. So I'm a little bit optimistic. I don't view there's no consensus among the Republican establishment, even during Trump, to have protectionism, really. It was not an idea in the election at all, except for against a few countries. So I'm moving, hopefully that will be that reprieve.
As we're coming to the end here, so does anyone have any final word before we wrap up? Okay. So could you please join me to give them a round of applause, please? Thank you very much for today. And thank you. Thank you everyone for today's discussion, and travel home safe tonight. Don't forget to follow for more events that FCCT will be held on the next occasion. Thank you.
มันมี 10% ก่อน